So let's start off by thinking about the why behind what we're doing first of all. When we're thinking of stories and we're thinking about tension, why should we have tension in storytelling anyway? Our doctors and healthcare practitioners tell us that being tense is not a good thing. So why do we want it in our stories? Home to the floor. Shout out. Why do we have tension? Nice one, Kathleen.
To keep us interested, to keep us listening.
To make our blood pressure go so we can be more attentive.
I mean, you're all sort of there with this idea of attention and engagement. If we read a book, watched a film, watched a TV show where there was no drama, just all of the characters got on all of the time, and everything they tried worked out fine. Now, we might feel like that's a very nice world to live in, but if we were watching that and trying to follow along, it wouldn't really be interesting, would it? We need that tension in order to create that narrative, to create that conflict, to create that struggle, and that's where our tension and engagement comes from. In terms of thinking about how your stories are going to engage your audiences, you need to think about, well, where am I going to weave in that tension, and how am I going to do it as well? And that's what we're going to explore in today's workshop. I've got a couple of content ideas to share with you. So in terms of what you're saying, how you're structuring your story, think about how that introduces tension. And then we'll look at a couple of delivery aspects as well in terms of how you say things as well as what you say builds in the tension. So we've got some practical exercises as well. I'll be throwing out some of the prompts for each principle that we cover to give you a little opportunity to try it out. We've got a couple pieces of video content today as well. So I'm doing as much as I can to introduce different means of tension and engagement in today's session to match the theme of the show. And we're going to start off with a golden oldie. I have a clip from Jaws. Now, I hope nobody's got a phobia of sharks. I know we've got a couple of phobias in the group. And we're just going to look at this little clip here. And Jaws, as a movie, is a masterstroke in building tension. And we're going to think a little bit about why that is and how we can apply the principles that's used in telling the story of Jaws and building tension there, and how that might translate into how we do our speeches and how we tell our stories. So I'll play this little clip. It's only about 60 seconds or so long. And I want you to think about what is happening in this scene that builds that tension. Sorry, that's a little bit quiet. Let me see if I can get that up anymore. It's got some subtitles if you can't hear. Alright, yeah, that's fine.
Michael's in the pond.
Hurry up, get that done. I can't do a damn thing. Get that rope undone. You got untangled up there. Help. I'm doing it.
Hey, fellas! Fellas! Hold of this sheet. Make it fast. Hey, you guys. You guys okay over there?
So I saw some of the drama on your videos there. Don't worry, I'm not going to show anything too graphic from the movie. What was happening in that scene that built some of that tension? And for those of you who are really eagle-eyed, you may have seen the slide skip where you may have seen the answer get revealed. What was building tension in that scene?
The music.
Yeah, music. So it's very iconic music from Jaws, isn't it? That dun 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 dun. It's been parodied and reused so much. So yeah, there's the element of the music. Obviously, that's not something we can necessarily do in a speech, but it's worth thinking about the effect that that music is having for sure. Yeah, so the music is part of it. What else do you think?
The audience saw the shark and the guy in the boat didn't. So we had an edge, an advantage in knowledge and what's going to happen.
Yes, so that is called dramatic irony, where the audience knows something that the characters in the story don't know. As that is a great technique for building tension because the the character is oblivious, so they aren't doing anything to protect themselves from that source of danger or threat. Whereas we as the audience know the dangerous threat in there, and so we're feeling the fear that they should be feeling, but they're not feeling. Yes, so that imbalance in knowledge between audience and characters. Yes, that's another good technique. What else do you think caused tension?
The kids playing at the beach nearby the shark.
Yeah, so that kind of vulnerability aspect, it's not some kind of like soldiers with guns who are there. It's these little kids playing in a boat. So that power imbalance of the big shark and the little kids. Yeah?
The
Yeah.
scream.
Oh, yeah, the scream. So kind of some of the audio as well. There's lots of screams. You can hear the panic. Yeah, so there's that kind of sensory aspect coming in as well. And Kathleen here is really hitting the shark on the nose here. The glimpse of the fins without a full reveal. So all of these other aspects we talked about definitely play into it. The one that I really wanted to laser focus in on here is the fins. Little bit of a backstory to Jaws the film. This, I believe, it might not have been Spielberg's first film, but it was kind of his first kind of blockbuster film. And this film had a really low budget. And when they tried to make the shark, they didn't have all of the kit and the CGI to make a good shark. And even if they had the budget, they still might not have been able to make a very good shark with the technology they had in, gosh, was this the 1970s? So because of the budget constraints, Spielberg actually couldn't show the shark. And that's why in the film, you nearly always just see it as the fin and you never see the shark itself. But actually this budget constraint turned out to be a real advantage. What Spielberg later shared in an interview, he said, people aren't scared of the shark, they're scared of the fin. It's the tension building up that creates the fear. If you actually just kind of see the shark, if you Google image shark right now, looking at a shark doesn't scare you, but seeing the fin going through the water does. The way that we can think of that in terms of our speeches is, for those of you who caught this really quickly, it's foreshadowing. When you're telling a story, show that something is approaching, but as we talk about, show, not tell. So if you think of what is the shark fin in my story, what is that element of the audience knows something's about to happen? Now, they might not know exactly what's going to happen, or they might know exactly what's going to happen, but they see it coming before it happens. And some of these other elements that we talked about, the sensory things, like the screams, or even that element of the music, the dun 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 dun, that music gets faster, 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 faster as the shark gets closer. All of those elements are building into something is going to happen. So rather than just, if that scene had gone, oh, look, there's a shark, and out of the water springs a shark, it doesn't have the same tension. But that was 60 seconds of build up into, there's a shark there, there's who the shark's going to attack, there's the guy, we can see the shark again, the boom hitting the boat, which I saw at least one of you jump at. So all of that builds into what's about to happen. how can you think about doing that in your stories as well? How do you foreshadow what's going to happen? So don't jump straight into the conflict, the drama, the suspense. Build into that and have these little hints and clues that are coming through so your audience starts to feel that tension building before you hit them with the proverbial shark attack. All right, let's get a quick practice of that. I'll come back into the room so I can see you all again. And those of you who've popped in as well, like Marta, good to have you along. Yes, yes. So this prompt, tell us about a disaster you saw coming. So just like seeing the shark fin coming through and about to attack, that's a disaster that you can see coming in the film. Can you tell us about a disaster that you saw coming? Feel free just to unmute and shout out when you've got an idea.
You mean like, for example, like climate change?
Yeah, you can go that bit. I was going to say,
Uh,
like there's a cup on the table and your cat
oh,
is like,
yeah.
"Doot, doot,
Oh,
doot, doot, doot,
right,
doot,
right,
doot."
right, right,
I
right,
mean, you can
right,
go for
right. Oh,
climate change as
I give
well.
you, yeah, no, I'll give you one
Yeah,
from
go
my
for it.
small life. Once I had my daughters, I have twins, now they're 16, but when they were just like 3, they had this thing of getting out of the seat belt and running around in the street, and I had to like run after them. And one went one way, the other went the other way. So I had to choose which one to go after. But of course, I went after the one that went to the street, to the main street. And there was basically a truck coming, like on this crazy street in France where there's no speed bumps. It's just like even going down and no visibility. And so I saw the disaster coming of my daughter, 3 years old, almost being squashed by a truck. But she made it, I think she made it to the other side of the street, or I can't remember exactly. I think my brain like cleaned it from the trauma was cleaned from my brain, but I kind of remember that crazy moment. And then after I recuperated that one, I went to go take care of the other one that went in the other direction. Definitely that's a scary disaster almost about to happen.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't want to give that a round of applause, but give Mary Jean a round of applause for
No,
sharing.
the long story, but we moved from that place like soon after, not right away after, but I really lobbied my ex-husband. We must move from this place because I cannot stay here any longer. This is way too dangerous. So we moved to Geneva, and then we had a more calm life.
Yeah, so we saw some elements of how you built that up. You didn't say, "Oh yeah, I had a disaster. My daughter ran in front of a truck." Like you didn't go straight there,
Yeah.
did you?
No,
You
I
talked
didn't, yeah.
about, well, I've got my daughters, and they had this thing of getting out of the seat belt, and I don't know if in a weird way this kind of adds to the story. I think that they're sort of like twins. It's
They're
almost like
twins, yeah.
it's almost like they're working like in unison. So they like go out the seatbelts at the same time, and then they
Let's
run
get
in
out.
opposite directions. You have to make the choice. It's like, oh, which do I choose? And then we're like, well, did you choose the right one? Should you have run after the other one?
Right, yeah, there was some suspense. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And then talking about the winding streets, so we start to get a little bit of that picture. It's like, well, it's not these kind of like big North American roads where you can see something coming from miles off, like anything could just like come around the corner really quickly. And then it's in France, and I think France have kind of reputation for like driving a bit
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
So there's that kind of like
definitely.
culture aspect that comes in there
Yeah.
as well.
Right.
Speed bumps. And then we have the drama of, oh my God, she's in the road and there's a truck. But you didn't go there
Yeah.
straight away.
Yeah.
You gave us a couple of things.
Right, right.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's an example of foreshadowing with, what was that, a 90-second story that you just told there, but you're already able to build in sort of probably about 3 or 4 elements of foreshadowing before actually going, this is the big dramatic thing that happened at the climax of the story. On to the next part. And yes, my cup example was rubbish, Kathleen. I totally agree. Next up, Speaking of cats, this is a humorous speech that I did about my old cat. This was in COVID times. This was several houses ago, so the backdrop is different. And I was in this particular part of the speech, I'm talking about my old flatmate, my old housemate, and he baked a cake for his girlfriend's graduation. And the punchline is that whilst he was away at the graduation, our cat jumped up onto the counter, licked off all of this like fancy icing work that he'd spent hours working on. And so when him and his girlfriend came back, he was like, I've got a surprise for you. Takes her through to the kitchen. The surprise is that there's a a slobbery cake sitting on the counter, no icing, and one little bite from our cat biting in to go, oh, I like that icing, but I didn't like the sponge. And so that's exactly what happened. That's the event. But see, when I told it like that, it didn't really have the same comedy value as when we actually experienced that in the moment. And one of my friends from Toastmasters said, he said, see with that story, you need to tell it in a different order, because the way I told it, like chronologically in the order that it happened. So my friend and his girlfriend, they go out to graduation, cat jumps up on the counter, ruins the cake. I said, well, when they come back, we already know the cake's ruined. So there's no drama, there's no tension, there's no punchline there. So instead what I did was I flipped the story. So I said, oh, my flatmate, he worked on this cake for days, you know, a little bit of exaggeration for comedic effect, worked on it for days, created all this elaborate icing. He goes off to the graduation and he goes, wow, you thought that was good, walking through the old building, getting the tap on the head and getting your red tube with the degree. Wait until you see this. Comes back to our flat, our apartment, opens the door, sees the kitchen door is open. On the floor is a lid. On the counter, a cake. But all of that icing they worked for days on is gone. Our cat had jumped and licked all the icing off. So it's the exact same story. I haven't changed anything. Done a little bit of kind of exaggeration here and there, a little bit of kind of delivery aspects just to eke out the tension a little bit more. But it's the same story. But by telling it in a different order, it changes the tension that happens. So this is sometimes what we need to do with our story. Sometimes we get a little bit too fixed to the facts of a story rather than focusing on the truth of a story. So let me explain the difference here. I'm not trying to do some misinformation stuff here. So the facts of the story are when you tell a story like exactly how it is, like this is what I was wearing, this is the time that it happened. But the truth of the story is the emotion and message of the story. And the emotion and message of that particular story was the shock and surprise of the cake being destroyed. But in order to convey that same shock and surprise of the cake being destroyed, I had to tell the story in a different way, in a different order, in order to get across that same effect. And often it's a case that with your stories, you don't have to do anything different to the story. You don't have to add all these elaborate details, but sometimes just changing the order in which you tell things. So if there's anything that the characters don't know, we need to stay with that ignorance as long as possible. With the Jaws clip, someone was saying that, I think it was Hans, that we know something that the audience don't. So there's that element of dramatic irony. So there's the man in the boat and he's going like, what's going on here? And we know there's a massive shark in that little bit of water. Think about how you've got to create that effect for your audience as well, keeping them out of the loop a little bit longer so it builds the tension for them. If there's a little bit of mystery and mystique there for the audience, they're going to feel that tension ramp up. Again, thinking of that fin going through the water, it's the fin that creates the tension. It's not the actual shark that creates the tension. So this is a second, kind of like telling the story in present tense. Yeah, exactly, Kathy. That's a good way of doing it. So when I was telling that story, I actually kind of went into my flatmate's name is Owen. I sort of went into his point of view a little bit, rather than me standing back and telling the story as David. Well, I know that Owen went out the flat, and I saw that the cat had ruined his cake, and I saw him come back in and see that the cat had ruined the cake. I actually went into Owen's version of the day, where he leaves and he comes back and he's got no idea that the cat's eating it. So yeah, that present tense, thinking of the point of view and thinking of the chronology as well. Chronology is just the order that you say things in. Let's have another little shot at this. 1, 2, 3, back in the room. So your prompt to test out this one. Tell us about something naughty that you or someone else did. So just like my cat was naughty, licking all the icing off the cake, tell us about something naughty that you or someone else did. Oh, Kathleen, straight in there. Yeah, go for it, Kathleen.
It's a pretty good one. My grandma was a total badass. And she was she had 7 children, and she was the kind of person that there was one time she had some tins of cat food in a bag, and a robber said, "Give me your handbag." And she went, "Oh, I'll give it you." And you can guess what happened next. And this one time she was walking her dog, and she was also walking my aunt's dog. So my aunt's dog, Henry, was a Great Dane. Anyone that's ever seen a Great Dane will know that, well, obviously they're pretty great, they're freaking huge. And they're also very slobbery. They look, yeah, not my favorite dog, but anyway. So she was walking these 2 dogs, and obviously, as you do, you walk the dog, you take some bags with you, etc. And she's on her way back home, and it starts to go dark, and she runs into a couple of lads, and this happens again. They say, "We'll have your purse." And she goes, "I ain't got my purse on me, I'm just walking the dogs." And they go, "Well, what's that in your hand?" And she's carrying a bag with her. It's a fish and chip bag. I say, "We'll have your fish and chips then." And she goes, "Yeah, all right then." Hands over the fish and chips. So imagine the little smile on her face as she was walking home, knowing that as soon as they take that home and get the plates warm in the oven and open that bag up, they're going to get a nice steaming pile of hot shit.
Round of applause, Kathleen.
That's a true story.
That's funny. I didn't clock there. I was like, oh, is she still carrying around that cat food? But why is she carrying around the cat food if she's out walking the dogs? Completely oblivious.
I'm not entirely sure why I added that element, and I think I was just trying to give you a bit of an idea of what my grandma's character was like, and that she was cheeky and just, you know, just very like kind of like, I always remember her as having a wicked laugh. Yeah.
Actually, that element kind of looked like it worked, because if you hadn't said that, I think I might have guessed about the bag of shit a little bit faster, but because you planted that seed of the cat food, and I was like, your nan must be carrying around all sorts of like random shit in bags.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So again, we saw a little bit of playing around with the order there. So chronologically, like what happened historically was Kathleen's nan took the dogs for a walk. They took a shit. She picked up the shit, and some people tried to rob her. Like that was like historically how it happened. But it's not funny if you tell it like that. You've got to take out that event of picking out the shit, and you've got to put that at the end in order for the punchline to really work. So that's an example of how you play along with the chronology. Kathleen didn't lie, right? Didn't say anything that wasn't true. Like all of that was true, but it's just playing around with the order that you tell things in order to tell the story in the most engaging and effective way. All right. We've covered 2 ideas for content there. So thinking about what am I going to say? How do I structure my story so that the content is coming across in the best way in order to build that tension? What we'll do now is we'll look a little bit at some delivery aspects of how you build tension. Now, has anyone been hearing, so I've been hearing on Spotify for probably the last few weeks, incessant adverts about this film, A Quiet Place. The world goes quiet. Tell them about the day the world goes quiet. And it's got that kind of, Marta, you'll like this, it's got that sort of like ASMR kind of vibe to it where I'm sitting there listening to my podcast and then suddenly there's all this, the world goes quiet. Find out the day the world goes quiet. Ah! So this has been ringing in my eardrums for the last couple weeks. But what I realized about this is that when I listen to this advert, it's like a sort of like horror thriller film. When I listen to this advert, I can feel that tension coming through. And that shows us that the tone of our voice can also be used to create tension. For example, if I'm telling a story, I walked through the neighborhood and I saw two people coming the other way. I wonder what they want to say. Not much tension in that, is there? But if I say, I walked through the neighborhood, there's two people coming my way. I wonder what they have to say. Exactly the same words, right? I said the same words both times. But you get two different contexts depending on how I say those words. Now, please excuse my amateur Shakespeare. That was not good acting by any means, but you can see the difference, right? So you can see how the way that we're saying things also injects that element of suspense. So if you are dropping the tone of your voice, we often associate those kind of lower, deeper tones with being a bit more sinister. Like we've talked about Darth Vader in these sessions before, right? And we think of that kind of deep baritone voice of Darth Vader. That deeper sounds we often see as being a bit more menacing. And then also if you're injecting that a little bit of an element of fear. If I'm walking along the street, when that fear comes in, then we start to feel that tension. Going all the way back to Jaws, we heard loud screams at the beach. Now, loud screams at the beach can be children playing in the sandcastles and having fun, or loud screams at the beach can be children running out of the water because they're scared of a shark. So it's the tone that makes the difference between those two. So think about how you can change your tone to induce that emotional response in your audience. The bad acting could also trigger some tension. Yeah, definitely. So let's have another wee shot at this. So another prompt. When did you have to stay quiet to avoid being found out? So just like this film with its adverts at the moment about staying quiet, when did you have to stay quiet to avoid being found out? Now that could literally mean you don't want to be heard because you're hiding somewhere, or that can be more of the metaphorical, you've got a secret but you can't share it. When did you have to stay quiet to avoid being found out?
I did a lot of reading under the covers when I was a child, when I should have been asleep.
I'll hold you in reserve, Kathleen, because you've already had a shot.
I just thought I'd break the silence.
Yeah. You're supposed to stay quiet, builds the tension. Like staying quiet, like could be playing hide and seek as a kid. You needed to cough at a funeral.
Actually, David, I want to say something about staying quiet. Since I joined the Speakers Club, I have actually also intended to practice staying quiet, because usually I'm very active in participation and sometimes a little bit overactive. So whenever you ask a question, I'm trying to hold back myself, like, you don't have to answer. Just relax, because I always feel responsible to break the silence, but I won't.
What a lovely meta answer to break the silence anyway. Let's have a round of applause for Amal. So, I know that was just a little bit of like waxing lyrical off the chest as well as an answer, but even in sort of the way that Amal built that up, she didn't just say, I'm really talkative, I try not to be talkative in the Virtual Speakers Club. She was like, ever since joining the Speakers Club, one of the things I've noticed is... So there was even that little bit of a preload and kind of building into it rather than just jumping straight away of, I would talk, but I talk too much, so I'm not going to talk. Again, that gets the chase too quickly and it sort of spoils the punchline when we get there. So even though that was an answer said half in jest, I still think there's some elements in that are exploring what we're looking at today. One more element to cover. And this element will need a little bit of fact checking from a Scotsman and a little bit of fact checking from a German as well. Just as well, we've got two of those in the Virtual Speakers Club. From the film Inglourious Bastards. And as you watch this scene, I want you to notice what is causing the tension.
Ich habe nämlich gedacht. Der Hauptsturmführer scheint einfach nur immun gegen meinen Charme zu sein. Das war ein Scherz. Scherz. Nein, natürlich störe ich. Natürlich störe ich. Meine Herrschaften, gestatten Sie, dass ich Ihnen nachschenke und dann werde ich Ihnen und dem Fräulein Adieu sagen. Erik hat eine Flasche 33 Jahre alten Whisky aus dem schottischen Hochland. Was sagen Sie, meine Herrschaften?
Das ist sehr freundlich, Sturmbannführer.
Erik, der 33er und frische Gläser. Wir wollen ja nicht, dass Sie den 33er hier mit Ihrem Gesöfter verseuchen.
Wie viele Gläser? 5. Für mich nicht.
Ich mag Scotch, Scotch mag mich nicht.
Ich auch nicht, ich bleib beim Shampoos.
3 Gläser. Wovon er was mag?
Auf ein 1000-jähriges deutsches Reich.
Ein 1000-jähriges Reich.
So, 2 bits of fact checking. I'm going to do the first one. That is not Scottish whiskey. Because they spelt whiskey with an E. If whiskey comes from Scotland, it's spelt with a Y, no E. So that is not Scottish whiskey. So that's the first bit of fact checking. Before we get to the second bit of fact checking, let's look at tension. Why is that scene tense? Where's the tension coming from?
The way the guy is unpredictable, so he starts off being like, oh, really flat, clever, really serious, and then he goes, ha 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 ha. It's unpredictable, and that's scary.
Yes, yeah. So sporadic, unpredictable, a little bit of a loose cannon of a character. Yeah. So there's the element of the character. Yeah. What
He
else
makes
is
it
building the tension?
he makes it quite uncomfortable, doesn't he? In the same way, for those reasons, he kind of makes it uncomfortable and bring in the silence because he's not getting anything from his remarks. You're kind of thinking, and then he says it's a joke and that kind of thing. It kind of leads you. You don't know where the story's going to go.
Yeah, so yourself and Mart have picked up on the big aspect that there's variety of things in this scene that create the tension. The reason why I took the clip from this part of the scene is the silence. So for the backstory of those of you who haven't necessarily seen the film, on the left we have a British spy impersonating a Nazi officer, and on the right we have an actual Nazi officer. The British spy gives himself away. And you can tell in that scene that he's done something to give himself away. But we don't necessarily know what. It's like, well, he's speaking in German and he's saying all the right things. Like, what has he done? This is where I need a fact check from our native German. Hans, is the way that he gives himself away actually correct, the way that he gives himself away?
Well, of course, you hear the language. There is some accent.
Yeah.
And I've seen the movie. I was thinking along the lines what's going to happen. And he obviously gives himself away in the story. I wouldn't have recognized it, but he says 3 classes, and a German would probably say 3 classes or 3 classes.
Yeah.
So it's the gesture. But I think it would be lost on most of the German viewers, audience.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, that's in the story, that's how they explain that he's given himself away. And you notice as soon as he does that, you see the officer's face change and there's that really long, awkward silence. And this is why body language is so important. You know, I'm always banging on about these gestures. This is why I bang on about gestures, because there's so much subtle communication that happens. So in this case, it's that tiny thing. And I'm pretty sure all of us watching the film, whether we're German or another culture, wouldn't know why that's a giveaway. But we know as soon as he does that, he's fucked up. Like we could just tell, you feel the whole atmosphere change, but you don't necessarily know why. And the way that is all conveyed is through the pause. Pauses create tension because we really, really don't like silence. And I know I make you guys sit through that so often during these sessions when I put out a prompt and I'm like, who wants to say this? And everyone's sitting there in silence and going, oh God, David's done this again. Why does he always do this to us? There's always this silence and waiting for someone to speak. Silence builds tension. There may be appropriate points during your story where you allow the silence to do the work. So rather than feeling that you have to inject all of this eject all of this tension to get people's attention, you can just allow the silence to do the work. So this is a second delivery aspect that you can think about. Sometimes the best delivery that we can do is actually not delivering at all. Those strategic pauses can build the tension. Again, it's that little bit of the shark fin effect that when we see the shark and it's going rah, 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 it's something that's stimulating, it's there, and we go out of that tension. But when you just see the fin sliding through the water and nothing else, there's that kind of that intake of breath of something's going to happen. And the pauses in your story can be that intake of breath, something's going to happen. Speaking of awkward silences. So, final prompt to wrap up these ideas, tell us about a time you put your foot in it. So just like the British spy doesn't realize that he's put his foot in it and given it away, tell us about a time that you put your foot in it inside it constantly. David, you need to be more specific. Tell us about a time you put your foot in it. This could be literally stepping in dog shit after Kathleen's nan's been walking the dogs. Something that you said at a party.
She picks it up and then gives it to Reeves.
You accidentally deleted a really important email or document. Called your boss a wanker and they were right behind you.
I'll give this one a go.
Yeah, go for
it. It reminds me of when I was working for this company. It was a big property company, and I was head of finance, that kind of thing. And the directors of the company, they weren't, shall we say, doing things in the proper way. I don't mean a dodgy way. It's just that they didn't really care. All they wanted to do was go out, buy houses, rent them out, because it was all for refugees at the time. So they had no shortage of takers, and we're working for the government anyway. So it was blank check, £2 million a month business. It was massive. It was huge. They didn't care. They just wanted to go out, buy the properties, and that was it, and get the rents in and take their dividends and that kind of thing. The problem was that me being the accountant, the finance officer, the operations manager, I needed to know where the money was being spent. And this guy came in, and I thought he was actually being, I was kind of, it was his first day. So he was kind of shadowing me to find out what went on in the business. And I kind of said, well, this is what I want to do. I want to create cost centers around the business to find out what's going on, where the money's going, how we're spending the money, where the profit's being made. Because all the directors want to do is go around spending it. The next day, I lost my job.
God. Again, I don't want to give that an applause, but a round of applause for Phil's contribution.
That's a true story as well.
Yeah, God, you have no luck with these things. Goodness me. So again, we saw some elements coming in there. We had the characterization, they're willing to do anything. We have the stakes, how much money is involved. And then, la 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 la, innocent Philip walks in. I'm just going to make a few inquiries. And we know that innocent Philip walking in, making a few inquiries with this stake of operation probably isn't going to end well. Don't necessarily know that that's the exact outcome. He's maybe going to get a telling off, or he's going to find something that he shouldn't have done, or he's going to lose his job, as we find out at the end. So those are some different elements, thinking about how you can bring that tension into the stories. Because with tension comes attention. Getting your audience engaged and involved in your story, we need that little bit of tension, the suspense, the drama, the conflict, the struggle, because that's what makes the story come to life. We've looked at some different elements there. Think about how you structure your story and what you say, and then also how you ultimately deliver it and tell it when you're in the moment. Does anyone have any questions about what we've covered in the workshop?
I
There we go. Let's do Mary Jean, Kathleen.
No, after. Yeah, go.
Okay, Kathleen, Mary Jean.
I was just going to comment on something that I was thinking during when you were showing the Jaws thing, which is that I've only ever seen clips of Jaws and I never watched it. And the reason being is that everybody knows what happens and it's so melodramatic. And I guess just on that point of sort of like not overdoing it is also a thing, because like I think that's one of the things with Jaws is like we know the story.
Yeah,
so if you read, especially if you're telling a story that's already happened, being melodramatic and kind of like, for me, I find that really off-putting, especially if I can see what's coming or I just know.
Yeah.
And there's supposed to be so totally over the top of it and be like, and then this happened and then and it's just like, oh.
Yeah, I'm the same. Like, I knew Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's dad, like before I saw the film, and like I'm a massive Star Wars fan, but I always think, I wish I'd been like an original viewer who like didn't know that that was going to happen. But you speak to a good point of, I think I've moaned about this, but I moaned about this in a positive way with Philip's last speech. I hate when people tell a story in third person and it's really obvious the person is them. I'm like, just tell us it's you. There's this child and they're on the pavement and they're crying. I'm like, I know it's you. So there is an element of, if we know what the outcome is going to be, like, don't oversell the outcome, just get to the outcome. But if there's genuinely some misdirection going on there, then that's how you can act in the misdirection. So yeah, I think that's a good point, bringing up the balance between, you want drama and suspense, but being over dramatic can have a counterintuitive effect. Oh, that's weird. You're speaking, but I can't hear you.
Who?
Kathleen, you're not on mute, but I can't hear you.
Oh, that's true.
That's weird. Try turn it off and on again. Mary Jean, let's come to you in the meantime.
I was just saying it's strange.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it works.
Sorry, yeah. No, I was just saying you got to have the payoff as well. So you can build all the suspension in the world, but then if the actual like reveal is just like, oh right, okay.
Yeah.
Then everybody's going to be like really invested, and then just feel like you've slapped them in the face.
Yeah. If Jaws was just a tuna fish, like it wouldn't be the same, would it? Mary Jean, your question.
Okay,
and then we'll have a break.
Yeah, the question was about when you're doing a speech that, like, let's say you're a teacher and you're supposed to be informative and pass information. How do you mix this in? So, I mean, because it sounds more like storytelling and it's more, I mean, I suppose there's people that it just comes naturally. So they always find some story from something, or they talk about some imaginary story, or I don't know what, but they create things to explain some information and they create an example around it. So yeah, I was just wondering if there's any tips about how to do it when you're trying to pass through a lot of information in a certain amount of time, and sometimes the story is taking space and time away from passing some details. I don't know. That's a little bit my question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, again, the balance between education and entertainment, I guess.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
So remember that it's not one or the other. Stories are one of the most powerful memories that we create. Can you remember the Disney films that you watched when you're a child, but you can't watch that webinar that you're on earlier this week? So stories create memory. If I was to do like a quick example, in a boggy field, 7,000 starving men await their doom. They've come together, bonded by brotherhood, with a belief that they can create a better life and a better world for those that they love. With no other option but to confront their enemy, the 7,000 men run out. They win their freedom. They're true patriots. And that is how Robert the Bruce beat the English at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. But rather than just say, one of the most significant military victories in Scotland's history is when Robert the Bruce beat the English and he was outnumbered 3-1 and he had a starving army and all the terrain was against him. The English had lots of knights and he had no knights. Like, that's all the facts of it. But when you tell it as a little story, it cements things better. Like, so that is not quite verbatim from the end of the Braveheart film, but I can remember that sequence of words, and that tells me the story of the Battle of Bannockburn beyond just the facts of the Battle of Bannockburn. So if you can just weave in those elements where we don't understand what a significant victory that is until we kind of see the characters and the story within that. Now, don't tell the whole thing as a story in a film, because you need to have, okay, right, what were some of the important factors in this? And you do need the facts and you do need the education. But bringing in that little bit of a storytelling element can help people remember that stuff that you're trying to teach them a lot better than just like, here's the slide with all the facts that you should remember about this thing. So it is a balancing act. That's maybe an example of how you weave in a story, but then still load the facts in afterwards.
Yeah, thank you.
I would also like to add an example of how you can make a story out of maybe something informative. I remember when I was in primary school, me and my sisters and brother went to Christian schools. So we used to start the day by reading the Bible. Although I'm not Christian, but we had one teacher, and she was a drama teacher as well as a history teacher. She used to tell the stories like she was acting it. And until today, first of all, I gained a lot of Islamic historic information through the Bible, because we have many things in common. And as well as the stories that she told, it imprinted in my mind the stories of the different prophets, and it was different than when another teacher would start, for example, reading verses out from the Bible. So yeah, it was really fantastic to see how you can bring storytelling into actually anything.
Mm-hmm. The world religions have mastered storytelling. The reason why religions have lasted thousands of years, like no religion really goes like, here's the 10 things you need to know about being a Christian, a Muslim, Jewish. Like, there is a little bit of that, like, don't get me wrong, but when you read any of the holy books, they're basically just stories. It's like, so what do you say is the most important part of being a good Christian, Jesus? Well, you should love thy neighbor. What do you mean, love thy neighbor? Like, just be kind, be really nice to them. Okay, yeah, be kind, be really nice to them. Right, okay, but like, what do you really mean? Well, here's the story of the Good Samaritan. Here's someone who walked past his mortal enemy, saw someone in danger, took him in, fed him, clothed him, make sure he was all right. Oh, that's what you mean by love thy neighbor. You understand the message through the story. And all great religions do that at telling the story. So do great businesses as well. Like Apple tells stories about its products. Like if you are an Apple user, you are XYZ, you think differently, you're changing the world, you're creative. Like that's all the story around the brand. All the major political and social movements like communism. Man, communism told a fantastic story. Everyone can be equal and we can live in a utopia. Like, what a great story. Doesn't quite work out in reality, but what a powerful story. And that story was so pervasive for, well, it is still pervasive, but certainly kind of 100 years ago, that was a very pervasive story to tell people who had nothing that they could have something. So you can always bring in stories to tell great principles, and all the best kind of movements and influential forces in our world are just about stories at the end of the day.